Hi, gang. So this is the second part of the lecture for this module. And now I want to transition away a little bit from, uh, begin to transition away from issues of justice and rights, although uh, this does still involve that. But the way I want to transition away uh, is to, in this lecture, I want to talk about bystanders versus good Samaritans. And then in the first lecture for the next unit next week, we're going to talk about triage. And for triage, I have a very long radio clip that I want you to listen to. It's about an hour. It's a very well done program. But for this, uh, we're just going to talk about bystanders and good Samaritans. Now, one of my favorite television programs was Seinfeld. I don't know if anybody still watches Seinfeld. I watched a lot of it in syndication. I didn't watch it when it was actually out, when it actually aired, but I watched it through the years. And one of my favorite episodes of Seinfeld comes at the very end. And it's kind of the undoing of Jerry and his friends. The pilot that, as in television pilot, that Jerry has created has been picked up by NBC, and they're given use of the NBC private jet. I think they're going to France, if my memory serves correct, when because of Kramer's antics, they had to make a emergency landing in Lowell, Massachusetts. While they're on the ground there and the plane is being checked out, Jerry and his crew, Elaine, George, and Kramer, witnessed a guy being carjacked. Have you seen the episode? I don't know. And as they're witnessing the guy being carjacked, it is being filmed, and they're making jokes about the guy's weight, about him being carjacked. And subsequently, they're put on trial. And the argument is that in Lowell, Massachusetts, there is a law called the Good Samaritan Law. That if you see a person in need, you have a responsibility to step in and render aid. Now, the term Good Samaritan comes from the Christian Bible, a parable, a story that Jesus told. And the parable is this: a man was going between two cities, and while he was going between the two cities, he met a group of bandits. They robbed him, beat him, took everything, and left him for dead. Now, in this story, this parable that Jesus tells, a religious elite person comes by and witnesses the person who has been beaten up and left for dead. And he moves over out of the way, but doesn't render aid. Now, this religiously elite person can definitely see the need, but chooses to ignore it. A different, secondly, a little bit later, a different type of religious elite person comes walking by, sees the person in need, and makes an intentional effort to avoid him without rendering aid. Finally, a Samaritan comes by. Now, Samaritans in this time would have been considered um, a less than savory character to many of the people who heard Jesus's story. A Samaritan would have been, I don't know. It's like some people talk about immigrants today. Like some people would talk about illegal immigrants. Like some people would disparage a particular racial or ethnic group. And Jesus was well aware that the Samaritans would have been disparaged and they would have understood that there was a lot of prejudice against the Samaritans. He would have understood that there was a lot of prejudice against the Samaritans. So when he when he introduces the Samaritan to the story, the assumption is he is going to be worse than the two religious elites who passed by and ignored the guy in need. The twist in the story is that whereas the two religious elites saw the need and ignored it, the Samaritan sees the need and responds to it in a very caring, loving, compassionate sort of way. He takes the stranger, complete stranger, puts him on his own transportation. In this case, is on his own ass, his own donkey. Carries him to what would be considered a hospital in the first century, which was basically a hotel. It's not really a hotel, but it's called an inn. And there he pays the innkeeper to take care of this guy, this stranger. He pays his bills. And not only does he pay his bill, he makes a promise that if he runs up anything above what the money that I'm giving you, so if he requires anything more, when I come back through, I will pay the balance. Don't worry about the guy. And he also renders aid, first aid, by treating the guy's wounds. Now, of course, Jesus's point is that, look, this guy that you thought was horrible, this immigrant, this illegal, I don't like those terms, but I hope you get what I'm saying. This guy, this scoundrel, is better than the two religious elites who saw the need and ignored it. And so as a result, the story lends itself to believe that this guy is more compassionate because he responded to the person in need. Hence the name of the story, The Good Samaritan. Now this raises, because we've been talking about liberty. Is there a requirement? Is there an expectation that we render aid if we find someone in need, in desperate need? Is there a requirement that we respond to them by helping them in some way? Now, if you have freedom, wouldn't it seem to say that, yes, you can ignore another person's need? So if you analyze that from a consequentialist, non-consequentialist point of view, how would you then judge the Samaritan as opposed to the religious elites? From a non-consequentialist point of view, you might say, well, if I were in a situation of need, I would want anyone who can to render aid to me. And so therefore I would want it. And I think it should be a universal law. But could you apply a consequentialist approach to that? Maybe if you looked at egoism, perhaps. But if you just do greatest good, you're talking one person for one person. It might be a little bit harder to make the argument there. So this is why some Good Samaritan laws have been passed, is to say that if you are in a position to help someone, you should help that person. But then we have to ask the question, can you actually legislate moral behavior? You can certainly outlaw some behavior. Do not kill, do not steal. But is it possible to legislate and make a law that someone has to be moral and good? I find it hard to make personally, I find it hard to conceive of making a law that says that someone has to be kind and good. It just seems troubling. But now, in light of this, I want to introduce to you a story. And it's the story of a woman by the name of Kitty Genovese. Kitty Genovese was a young woman who lived in Kew Gardens, Queens, in 1964. And back in those days, I know it's hard to conceive, but back in those days, there was no 911. So you couldn't pick up the phone and dial 911. You actually had to call the police department and report. So you had to dial the whole number to report something. And Kitty Genovese was on her way home at something like 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, when she was attacked by a man who eventually killed her. The reports went out that no one, in spite of all of her neighbors in their apartments hearing her screams, that no one responded by calling the police. And that, the argument is made, had they called the police, then perhaps Kitty Genovese would not have been killed, and that she would have been alive. Or at least if she had been killed, the guy who killed her would have been apprehended. Now the question is, if you have liberty, if you have freedom, don't you have a right to ignore the cries of help? Or do you have a moral obligation to respond if you can? What if you see someone drowning, but you can't swim? Is there a moral obligation to jump in? Or do you do more harm? In the case of Kitty Genovese, I'm going to post an article for you that raises it, but I'm also going to post a couple of clips for you to consider about Kitty Genovese. And ask yourself, is there a moral obligation to respond? Can you legislate morality in any way? Or is it easier just to legislate against something? So those are questions that I hope you will be thinking about as you read the story and as you watch the clips that I'm going to share with you about this. So I'm going to be grading your papers. You will have those, you'll have your responses before the next class. Also, just by way of looking at your syllabus, don't forget that next Wednesday, the 14th, you also have another paper due, another reflection paper. And next week, with the lectures and with the material, we're going to turn from issues of justice and rights and things like that to begin to talk about life and death issues in the area of bioethics. So thanks, guys. Hang in there. We're getting close to halfway through the semester, so hang in there. You will make it, I promise. Have a good day.